King starts this chapter with the story of dishonesty piled on dishonesty. In the courses you've taken on Chinese history, I'm sure you've covered the so-called Boxer Rebellion. When you were on that unit covering the late Qing dynasty, did you spend many days talking about the causes of that destructive conflict? Did you learn the story of the fake news that came out of Denver that stirred the pot? Did you learn that that report of fake news was itself fake news, published decades after the event? We are plagued today with widespread distrust of our news sources. This is not just an American phenomenon. As I write these notes, the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine has been going on for a month. Official Russian sources declare many reports of the war, whether of Russian atrocities or of Russian losses, to be fake news. If we had a better historical sense, we might be less surprised by this problem. The publicly stated ethos of modern journalism is to report the news objectively and impartially. We imagine that once upon a time, maybe sometime in the previous century, our TV and print journalism exemplified this ethos. Now, with the internet in full bloom, combined with the death of the old model of paying for journalism, we've seen the explosion of news sources. Well, at least of sources that purport to give us the news. We've seen enough failures of the journalistic ethos that our trust has declined. We've also returned to what, in fact, is an older reality of partisan journalism. What may make our time worse than that old time, associated in the transition to what I called the ethos of modern journalism with the term yellow journalism, is that the outward stance of news agencies remains the claim of impartiality and objectivity, when they are often partisan in their commitments and sometimes in their product. Journalists are not helped by our polarized populace. We want our views and ideologies to be seen as truth. When we hear reports that align with what we are committed to, we eagerly affirm them. When we hear reports that we perceive to be in conflict with our commitments, then we jump in with the fake news accusations. Honesty and honest reporting touches not only on the contemporary phenomena we call the news, it is also implicated in our understanding and use of what we call history. History was my undergrad major. My doctoral work, it was my minor field. I've thought and continue to think deeply about history. From what I see of the history wars in our culture, we would profit a great deal from greater reliance on the virtue of intellectual honesty. If we're going to be honest, it's important to start with the knowledge that there are multiple ways to use the word history. The first use of the word history is probably what ordinary people first think of when they hear the word. In this sense, history is simply the things that happened. The second use of the word history is for the stories we tell about the things that happened. Obviously, there is a connection between the stories we tell and the things that happened, but they're not the same thing. The third use of history points to the use we make of our stories about the things that happened. When we look at history in the first sense, considering it as things that happened, we're dealing with things that are the way they are, whether we like it or not. I can dislike the fact that the Portuguese ran my ancestors out of the Dutch colony in Brazil in the 17th century, but I can't do anything about it. My desires and ideological commitments are irrelevant. I didn't learn this bit of history when I was in school. Sure, I knew that Portuguese was the dominant language of Brazil, but it wasn't until well after I'd finished school that I learned that there had even been a Dutch colony there, let alone that some of my ancestors had been there. When I started researching this history, some of the sources I found were in Portuguese, some in Dutch. I'd never studied either language, but since I'd taken Spanish in junior high and German in high school, I could figure out some bits of each. Through careful effort, remember covering that virtue in a previous chapter, I was able to learn a bit about the things that happened. I'll never know everything that happened in that bit of history, or any other bit for that matter. Honesty requires me to recognize the historian's limitations. Oh, I can tell you stories about the things that happened, The stories include pirates and the hardships of a poorly paid missionary pastor. The second use of history is always selective. When we tell the stories that we call history, we have to choose which things happened that we're going to talk about. We have to interpret them, tie them together. We have to make hypotheses about causes and effects. Since the events I mentioned happened over 350 years ago, we don't even have access to all the details of the things that happened. That history in the sense of things that happened, cannot change, but we only have limited access to that kind of history. History is the stories we tell about the past. Well, that changes all the time. As we learn more, possibly by finding new sources, by giving more weight to some sources and less to others, by a different selection of details. There's no way to get beyond selecting some details and excluding others, or by having new audiences. We tell the old stories in new ways, or tell the new stories entirely. Though selectivity in history is unavoidable, we cannot use that as an excuse to be dishonest in our selectivity. We need to be ready to defend our selections when questioned. The stories we tell are open to criticism. One side of my wife's family tells of an ancestor who came to America as a pirate with Lafitte. Another side tells of the very same ancestor, coming to America with Lafayette. To my English-speaking ears, I can imagine how Lafitte and Lafayette can be confused. We can tell the story of the immigrant ancestor either way, fitting into early piracy along the Gulf Coast, or of heroism helping in the American Revolution. Attention to evidence of things that happened can give us reason to believe one account or the other. Well, as things stand so far, my assessment of the things that happened doesn't give credence to either story. This particular ancestor was born in France in 1795 and came to America in 1807, settling in Maryland. As a 12-year-old, he likely came with his parents, but I've yet to find any data on them. In this case, I continue to look for evidence of things that happened so I can tell a better story. For me, as for some of you, I bet, a better story is not just one that is more entertaining or one that connects our ancestors with famous people, but one that is more likely accurate, more likely in line with things that happened. What about the third sense of history that I mentioned above, the uses to which we put our stories of the things that happened? I spent several years teaching at Wiley College in Marshall, Texas. If you're trying to think of where you may have heard that name, mentioning that it is the school featured in the movie The Great Debaters may help. That movie was based on things that happened. Wiley College was established in 1873. One of the things that happened in the early 20th century was that Professor Melvin B. Tolson became coach of the debate team. Though the subject of the film is the performance and triumph of the debate team, many other things that happened are depicted in the film. Early on, we see a lynching. Of the things that happened in our country, lynchings were one of the most disgusting, maybe even more disgusting than the lynchings themselves, if such is possible, was the fact that they were often treated as entertainment. People who looked like my ancestors would have postcards made of themselves and their children gathered around the strange fruit hanging from the not just southern trees, the hanged and mutilated bodies. Some would even take home body parts as souvenirs. Getting carried away. Back to the story. As I recall, the lynching theme is very subdued in the movie and only displayed once, and quickly at that. The thing is, the main characters had seen it. They didn't talk about it. They didn't protest it. They knew it could have been them, or their father, or their mother, or their child. Throughout the film, they struggle not only with becoming skilled debaters, but with life in a society that could turn on them and kill them, and with impunity at a moment's notice. When we compare the movie, a story about things that happened, with the actual things that happened, we see some differences. The story was essentially accurate, but merged and modified some characters, Also, the climactic debate for the national championship was depicted in the movie as a debate against Harvard, but was in the course of the things that happened, a debate with USC, the reigning national champion at that time. How was the story used? Some tellings of the story of Professor Tolson and his team's victories could be used to show racists that African Americans were fully capable of academic work and scholarly argumentation. The story of those things that happened could also be told to encourage young African Americans to believe in their potential against the Jim Crow prejudice of the age. More recently, the story of these things that happened was used to restart the heritage of debate at Wiley College. I had many of these later day great debaters in my classes, and I happily continue to cheer them on as they advance in life. I've heard talk about erasing or removing history. As a historian, I don't care for the idea. As a philosopher of history, I stop and ask in these contexts, which sense of history are we talking about? We cannot erase or remove history in the sense of the things that happened. We can burn a courthouse or documents. We can work to forget things that we don't like, though some who talk against erasing history sound like they mean erasing the things that happened. I don't think that's what they're pointing at. What I believe they're primarily pointing at is the change in the stories we tell about the things that happened. Those stories are not themselves the things that happened, but they are how we understand and remember the things that happened. When I tell a person who's heard all his life that there's no evidence that the ancestor came to America with Lafayette or served in the Boston Tea Party, that can be disappointing, even offensive. It's a story they've heard all their lives, maybe even a story that shaped their sense of identity. Sometimes it's national history that we perceive as being changed. Generations of Southerners in the U.S. have been taught that the cause of secession that led to the Civil War was the South's commitment to states' rights and not to slavery. The honest historian will not be content to simply believe what she's been told. She'll want to consider contemporaneous records, such as the secession documents the states produced. When she looks at what the declarations of secession said, she'll see that states' rights were important to them, but that a particular state right was central, the right to own Black people as slaves. An honest historian that reports what she finds in those documents will have to live with the heat that it generates from some of the people around her. There's also change in the way stories are used. The use to which we put stories is twice removed from history as things that happened. The stories we tell, as I mentioned above, are always selective. We can't tell everything. Not only do we not know everything, but telling everything fills too much space and would be exceedingly dull. We choose some details amid others. We weigh the details and come to an interpretation, or more often, sets of interpretations. We then deploy these stories to some end, often an end we have in mind before we even started composing the stories. The famous 19th century German historian Leopold von Ranke spoke of history's job as telling it wie es eigentlich gewesen, as it actually was. Sure, that's true, sort of, to some degree. But why this story and not that story? Why this interpretation and not that interpretation? We may have objectivity at the level of things that happened, but our stories and the uses to which we put them are inescapably subjective. So what does all that do for our current arguments? I'd encourage people to slow down, think things through, whether those things be tearing down statues or condemning people. I know there's plenty of righteous indignation on each side. Each side will likely think I have my head in the clouds or in the sand and am stuck in an ivory tower. That may be. History is worth thinking about slowly and carefully, whether it's our study of the things that happened, the stories we tell about the things that happened, or the uses to which we put our stories about the things that happened. In this chapter, King provides us with valuable insights into the nature of intellectual honesty and the various forms of dishonesty. Dishonesty, we see, is much more than just lying. I think these are important enough that they might show up on an exam at some point. So take a look at what he has to say. On page 145, King offers a definition of the virtue of intellectual honesty. He writes, intellectual honesty is a disposition to express the truth as we see it through our thought, speech, and behavior, to avoid intentionally distorting the truth as we see it, and to do so because we revere the truth and think it valuable. There are some important terms and concepts here. I'll mention a couple. First, there's the word disposition. We've seen that one quite a bit through this book. Do you feel like you have a firm grasp on what the word means? Considering yourself, have you examined your life to become aware of the central dispositions in your life, particularly the dispositions that relate to your intellectual life and actions? Second, there's the idea of revering the truth. If our conception of truth is that it's wholly subjective, that there is only my truth, not truth in general, then revering the truth will likely be equivalent to revering myself. When I revere the truth, I value it not only for the power it gives me over others, I value it for the way it can correct me and make me better. A famous person once said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Generations of academics have loved that claim so much that it's been carved into innumerable buildings on campuses across the country. As one who knows the origin of the claim, I can tell that it is almost always taken out of context. In its original context, it had nothing at all to do with modern academia and academic concerns. If you want to know more about that original context, ask me sometime. When we do take it abstracted from its original context, we can still find value in it. When we revere the truth, we will be inclined to think that finding the truth is good for us, even if it conflicts with or challenges some of our current beliefs. Because we revere truth, we will value the correction that honesty brings us. What are some of the costs of intellectual dishonesty that you've observed? What are some ways you think we could help this generation, whether they be students or not, attain the virtue of intellectual honesty?